According to the Census Bureau, using the current measuring model, 37 million Americans live in poverty. 37 million. If you talk to a liberal, American poverty is, quote, a plague, end quote. With people living in, quote, terrible circumstances, end quote. Where 1 in 8 Americans, quote, struggle with incredible poverty, end quote. These are all statements taken from John Edwards' campaigning during his effort, his run for the White House, and echoed by the mostly stupid media, I mean the Marxist socialist media, I mean mainstream media. MSM. That's interesting. They claim that 37 million people do not have enough food, shelter, or clothing. And during that time, of course, they were blaming Bush for all of that. However, the 37 million people identified by the government as poor are actually pretty well off. Of the 37 million people identified by the government as poor, only a small fraction can actually be said to meet the criteria that John Edwards threw around. People who actually don't have enough food to sustain themselves without somebody giving them some. People who actually don't have a place to find shelter, and people who actually don't have the means to clothe themselves without assistance. Only about 10% of the 37 million. Now that's a pretty good sized number. But it's a far cry from 37 million. And most of those people are getting the help. Somebody is giving them the clothes, somebody is giving them the shelter, somebody is giving them the food. Only a very, very, very small handful are what you would call truly destitute. I'm going to read something to you from Heritage Foundation. That's a pretty good think tank. I like their work. They do a lot of study and research. And this report I received has got graphs and it's all footnoted. It's very well done. Very, very well researched. Here's what it means to be poor in America. You ready? If those persons, of the 37 million people that are considered poor, 43% of that group own their own homes. Hello? 43% of the 37 million poor people in America own their own homes. Get this. 80% of poor households have air conditioning. Of course, in Santa Maria, we don't need it, or I would have really had fun with that joke. I don't even have air conditioning, you know what I mean? But we don't. Nobody has air conditioning in Santa Maria. Anyway, consider this in light of the fact that in the early 70s, only 36% of the entire United States population had air conditioning. Let me run that by you again. In the 70s, only 36% of the entire American population had air conditioning in their homes. Today, 80% of those called poor have air conditioning in their homes. Only 6% of the 37 million poor in America live in overcrowded conditions. 2/3, 66.666, so on percent, of the people who are called poor live in houses or quarters where there are more than 2 rooms for each person in the house. So 4 people living in a house have an 8-room house. 3 people living in a house have at least a 6-room house. That's plenty of room to move around. You can play tag in a room like that, in a house like that. Kids can run around. Amen? It's interesting, isn't it? Here you go. Here's another one. The typical poor American has more living space than the average individual living in Paris, London, Vienna, or Athens. That's the typical poor person in America. Has more living space than the average person. And that's not the average poor. The average citizen in those cities. Almost 75% of all poor households own a car. 31% own 2 or more. That's interesting. Yeah, we're just trying to get my handle on what it means to be poor in America. What does it mean to be poor in America? You'll notice 97% of the poor in America have a color television. 97%. Amen. More than half own 2 or more color televisions. So it's ridiculous. 78% have a VCR or a DVD player. 62% have cable or satellite TV. I don't even have that. Yeah. 89%, oh no, I'm sorry, 99% own a microwave oven. More than half own a stereo and more than a third have an automatic dishwasher. I remember in my household when we got our first microwave, it was like, wow, we've really come up in the world, moving on up. I remember, getting the first microwave oven. I remember not having garbage disposals even. Yeah. Good night. I definitely remember not having dishwashers for a long, long time. That was like, man, you were really living high on the hog if you had a dishwasher. Good night. I mean, it was a time in my lifetime when if you had a dishwasher, that was like in my dad's lifetime having an indoor toilet. My point is, what does it mean to be poor in America? Basically, it means you don't have as much as you'd like. Only for a very few does it mean that they actually don't have what they need. Only for a very few indeed.